Good evening. My name is Manoj Attavle. I'm the Interim Associate Dean for the Miller College of Business. I'm happy to introduce to you today Michelle Poole. Michelle is the Human Resources Lead for the Civil Aerospace Business with Rolls-Royce North America. Michelle is a 17-year veteran of the human resources field. She joined Rolls-Royce in 2006 and has undertaken increasingly important responsibilities within Rolls-Royce. She is currently based in Indiana. This session, this talk, is brought to you by the Ball State chapter of Pi Sigma Epsilon and has been hosted by the Miller College of Business. Let me introduce to you Michelle Poole. And at the same time, let me introduce to you Jeff Lackey. Jeff Lackey is the Vice President for Professional Development with Pi Sigma Epsilon, and he will be coordinating the events today.
Thank you. Thanks. Hi.
All right, guys. So first and foremost, I want to thank Dean Meyering and the Miller College of Business for their continued support of this lecture series. This event is being put on by Pi Sigma Epsilon, so we're the largest co-ed business fraternity on Ball State's campus with a focus in management, marketing, and sales. Today here we have Michelle Poole from Rolls-Royce, and she's here to talk about her global experience personally and from a corporate perspective. And before we get started, I'm going to turn it over to her for a few minutes to clarify a few things about Rolls-Royce.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Well, good evening to all of you. Thank you for having me join you. I'm really excited to be here. I get a great level of enjoyment from meeting with students across different universities in the US. But before we do kick off, just curious to know, does anybody know much about Rolls-Royce, what we do? Oh, I got a bit of a maybe. Go ahead.
Car manufacturing.
Okay, car manufacturing. Anybody want to raise that bid? Oh, we got one over here. All right, pretty good. All right, so let me help you understand a little bit about Rolls-Royce. It wasn't a test. It's just that if I had $1 for every time somebody asked me if I had a company car, I probably would have retired about 5 years ago. So, Rolls-Royce, what are we? We are indeed, we provide, I guess, power to aircraft, to military applications, power systems. We're more famous for our car brand, but actually Rolls-Royce sold the car business back in the 80s. It's currently owned by BMW. So when you see Rolls-Royce brand, that's BMW. When you hear Rolls-Royce the company, that's us, and we basically do gas turbine engines and various other applications of power. So very interesting, diverse organization to be part of, with a huge history in terms of how we've got to be where we are now. And from a personal perspective, I've seen that grow in the UK and then also more recently in the United States. So that's Rolls-Royce, I guess.
And that's really interesting. I know Rolls-Royce has different hubs across Singapore and Indonesia, so that probably has you traveling a lot. So I'm really interested to know, and I'm sure the audience is as well, how many different countries you've visited and been to for work purposes, and maybe even not for work purposes.
That's a good question. So yes, I do travel quite a bit. More recently, a lot of my travel is regional within the United States. So from an actual work perspective, I've been very fortunate that in my career through Rolls-Royce, I've had the opportunities to work both in the UK and in the United States. Prior to Rolls-Royce, I had the opportunity to work in Poland, which was very interesting. However, outside of that, Rolls-Royce is a global organization, and just naturally through my different roles that I've had the opportunity to work in Canada, Germany, Norway, a lot of interactions with Brazil, Singapore, France. So it's a pretty expansive network that we get access to, and understanding and recognizing all of the differences that go into those different countries and how they operate has been interesting. On a personal level, people always wonder if I traveled much in Europe, given that's where my heritage is from? Actually, the answer to that question is no. Hindsight's a beautiful thing. If I'd have known at age 21 that I was going to end up living in the US and making my life here, I think I probably would have explored Europe a little bit more. But I did a bit of a count, because Jeff had asked me this question a few weeks ago, and I think I've traveled to maybe 25 to 30 different countries through work and personal, so quite a few.
That's great, and I understand that traveling a lot, one of the main areas when working for Rolls-Royce that you focused on was the shared services sector. So could you tell us a little bit more about what exactly shared services is?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that don't know, shared services is basically the centralization of transactional or administrative services that can be done in one location. If you think about things like HR, finance, IT, procurement, a lot of your functional areas lend themselves to be done, standardized processes, economies of scale, looking at outsourcing opportunities. And really from a Rolls-Royce perspective, we have acquired many businesses along the way, all of which operate slightly differently. So having a shared service center concept allows you to bring things together, look at common approaches, and try and drive synergies across the organization. So I was pretty fortunate to be involved in the setup of our UK HR Shared Service Centre, which was the first shared service centre that Rolls-Royce had. And it was very much grounded on strong organisational design, strong operating principles, a very robust model that we were working towards to be able to bring that to fruition and get that to go live in the UK, which was a big achievement.
That's great. And so what you're basically saying is that shared services really makes the employees' lives easier and kind of helps categorize a bunch of different sectors of the organization under one roof?
Yeah, it's basically a single point of contact for your employees to be able to get access to services. Now, are they a one-stop shop for everything? No, that is unrealistic to expect, one place to have the answer to everything. But if you think about any kind of business that you contact today, take Amazon, take the bank that you contact, you would go through to that first line of customer service that can help you with probably 80-90% of the generic inquiries that anybody would have, and that's the same in a workplace. And then beyond that, you put the support and the infrastructure in place to answer the rest of it. So really, how do you enable your employees to either click online, be able to find their answers, be able to be more interactive with it, or have a single point of contact that they can call to get information and advice?
So what you were saying earlier is that you traveled abroad a lot. I've been to a lot of different countries. Could you tell us about some of the most interesting, the most welcoming, and maybe even the hardest to integrate with countries that you've experienced?
Yes. So I would say the most interesting has definitely been Asia Pacific, and being able to reflect on the different cultures that they have there and how that manifests itself in the organization. And sometimes, from a US perspective, we can look at different state legislation all the way down to county legislation that impacts our employees. And then you go and look at what our team are doing over in Asia Pac, and they've got Singapore and China and India, and the list goes on and on and on. So they've got all of these different countries to manage as well. And within that, the one that stands out for me was Singapore, and I find it fascinating how they're having to react to the talent market in Singapore and really adapt their approach to developing and trying to attract and retain talent, and they have very different issues to what we would see in the UK and the US. So I think that's probably been the most interesting, to see how culture actually impacts an organization and how you change things. I'll flip to the one that's probably been the most challenging next, because I always like to end on a high, so we'll get to the most welcoming last. But I think the most challenging for me is Canada, and I say that because it's so close to the US, and it's really easy just to kind of sweep it into this North America category and assume that everything's the same, and it's not. You may as well be comparing Singapore and the US. It's totally different. And we were operating out of Montreal, which has its own set of challenges with their language requirements. Now, I studied French in school, but I mean, I can order you an ice cream. That's probably about the extent of it. I cannot negotiate with a trade union in French, and learned that pretty early on in my career. So I think it was quite challenging walking into a meeting and not knowing whether the person sitting across the table from you was bilingual, francophone, could speak English but didn't want to speak English because they just didn't want to talk to you, which sometimes people don't. So that was incredibly challenging for me because I'm the type of person that I want to have a conversation with somebody. I want to build a relationship. And when you're doing that with the language barrier, that can be really hard. Also, a lot of reflection about why Canada felt like they did. And, you know, I understand it now. Hindsight, again, is a beautiful thing. But if you are kind of the smaller entity to a big US organization, and you are quite different, you sometimes feel like it's not understood. So I think there was a level of that kind of came through with the implementation. So definitely Canada was probably the most challenging. My French did improve. I can order you a ham and cheese sandwich as well as an ice cream now. That's about the limit. But I would say the most welcoming, and not just because I'm sitting in the US, but I will absolutely say it's the US. When I first got offered the opportunity to come over to the United States, which incidentally was 10 years ago last week, I was offered a 9-month assignment. Come over, do a task, go home. Well, 10 years later, I'm still here. I'm married to an American. I have 2 American boys who claim to be British American, which I'm slightly proud of. And this is home now, and people say, like, wow, you left behind your whole life and settled here in the US. And yeah, absolutely I did, and it is all about how welcoming the US culture has been to somebody from afar. I think back to the early days of all of the different people in my career that made me feel welcome, invited me over to watch the Super Bowl. I didn't even know what American football was, but I was there wondering why an hour-long game was taking 4 hours. But that ability to have people around you that wanted you to be part of their team has really resonated with me, and it's something that I take into everything that I do as I think about, doesn't matter where that person's coming from, whether they are born and bred in Indianapolis, whether they're coming in from California or whether they're coming from England, like how do you create an environment where they can be at their best and that they feel as though they're part of the team, and the people in the US enabled that for me. So definitely been the most welcoming, and that's why I'm still here, I guess.
And so you're kind of just saying, just talking about kind of your experience in all these different countries, in the US, in the UK, Canada. What would you say is the biggest culture shock you've experienced when traveling to a country?
So if I think back to coming to the US from the UK, you know, you kind of look at that and you say, well, we speak the same language, right? No big difference, a couple of words here or there. Same type of environment, we've got modern technology, this should be relatively straightforward. I remember on day 1, somebody in the team, their phone ringing, and I answered it, and I wrote down a message from the person that was on the phone and stuck it on their computer for them. And when they came back to their desk, they kind of said, why did you answer my phone? Why wouldn't I? It was ringing. And in the UK, the extent of our politeness as a culture is that we can all pick up each other's phones. There's actually like a functionality on all of the, what was then desk phones, star 52, picks up Joe's phone over there, it's just what you do. And they were so shocked that I'd picked up their phone, and I was just like, I don't understand. I answered your phone, I took a message, someone wanted to get hold of you, this is a good thing. And it wasn't. It was not perceived as a good thing at all. So that was day 1. Day 2, I asked, anybody want a drink, cup of tea, coffee, what would you like? No. Day 3, I asked again. And on day 4, somebody turned around and said, if we want a drink and we're thirsty, we'll go get one. It's like, oh, okay, it's just being nice. Like, that's what we do in England. So recognizing very early on that there was these real subtle differences that I just was not prepared for at all. And there were some fundamental things that I've been trained by my mum and dad. This is what you do. You know, you offer to make people a drink. I thought, gosh, if my mum could see me now walking to make a cup of tea and not offering one to anybody else, I think she might disown me. But I picked up early from those two cues that I needed to pay attention a little bit more to the culture around me, and pay attention to what everyone else was doing and just kind of follow suit a little bit. So if everybody else was going to Arby's for lunch, well, that's where I needed to go for lunch because that's what we do in America. So it was that kind of approach that I had to take, but that shocked me more than anything because it's the same, but it's not.
And it sounds like what you're saying is you're operating in these environments and you really don't know anything about them. Besides like some of these other factors, what are some of the ways that you overcame adapting to these environments that you really didn't know anything about?
So my number one rule that I've learned is surround yourself by a great team. And if you have a great team, then you will be much stronger as a result of it. So I think recognizing that you don't always know what you think you know, and knowing the difference between what you know and what you think you know is really important. And having a team that you trust to be able to hold that mirror up and say, it's not how we do it over here, and a team that feel confident that they can do that without insulting you or without embarrassing you, or if you're sitting in a meeting, they feel strong enough to say, that's great, Michelle, but that's, you need to think about this, that, and the other. That, for me, is one of the things that's really helped me through the transitions. I think the other thing that I've kind of learned is that you have to be listening. If you're not listening and paying attention, you are going to make some big just errors, and they're not coming from a place of bad intent. Everybody's trying to do the right thing, but you can slip up really easily if it's not a cultural norm that you're used to, and the last thing you want to do is kind of have some of those mistakes and offend people, because it's easily done. So just being more mindful of that is something that I've had to transition.
Yeah, and it sounds like you've faced a lot of challenges over the past 17 years working for Rolls-Royce and working internationally. There's a lot you've overcame, a lot you've learned. I'd love to know, Rolls-Royce is a global company. I would really love to know some of the communication barriers that you ran into, because I understand it's a global company. You're having to communicate with different people on different time zones. So what was that like?
Yeah. So for anybody that you meet, that works in a global organization, they will be able to tell you, and if you ever find yourselves in that position, you'll find out very quickly that there is not an 8 till 4, 9 till 5 type job in a global organization. An example, my current business manager is based in Singapore. So if anybody knows their geography, what's the time right now? 7:28 at night, so we're all ready to have dinner, put the kids to bed, and do your studying, as you're all going to be doing tonight, right? She's getting up for the day. So my whole entire work day, my manager is asleep, and then the entire time that I'm asleep, she's awake. So managing that and having a framework in place that enables you to have the accountability that you need, have the decision-making authority that you need, and have the trust in your relationship with each other to be able to get on and do is really vital. And then you kind of mix into that all of the other time zones that happen between, Asia and America, and there's different people that want parts of your day at any one time. You can find yourself, if you're not careful, working kind of 24 hours a day to accommodate it. So I think being mindful of time zones is really important, and recognizing that you can only do so much in a day. And I always say that it's one thing volunteering to dial into a call at 5, 6 a.m. in the morning. It's a totally other thing for someone to put it on your calendar and expect you to be there. And you can control that expectation. So if it's something that I feel like I need to be on or I need to be involved in, and that's the only time we can do it, then yep, I will volunteer, I'll be there. But I do know that if somebody puts that on my calendar, my perspective on that meeting is a little jaded before I already get to it, because I'm getting up at 4 a.m. in the morning and I'm not a morning person. So that's been a challenge. Language, not just kind of English versus French, German, Spanish or whatever, but cultural language. So what does something mean in the UK versus what does it mean in the US? And there are some that will mix you up there. So I've said things before and people say, oh, you can't say that over here. Like, that's not allowed. And vice versa. Someone will say something and I'll go, ooh, And they're like, what? I didn't say anything wrong. So that's been a definite challenge, just working that out. And also email, not a good communication tool when you're working with different languages and different cultures, because you are going to read that email with your voice, with your culture, and they're writing it with a totally different voice, with a totally different culture. So you can misinterpret quite a lot. So pick up the phone.
So it sounds like you're saying you need to be mindful of a lot of things when working internationally. Time, culture, language, even the form of messaging and your communication methods. So could you tell us a little bit more about the differences between setting up shared services in the United States, maybe compared to the UK?
Yeah. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I was really lucky that the project that I worked on in the UK was setting up the UK Shared Service Center. So I had this view of what a shared service center was, and everything that you needed to have in place to run a shared service center. And I knew exactly how we were going to set up the US, or the North America Shared Service Center, before I arrived in the US. Very clear on it. It's going to be easy, 9 months, in and out, job done. I got over here and started understanding a little bit more about different legislation, different business alignment, processes that were already outsourced. The US was much further ahead than the UK was on its outsourcing journey, so things like benefits administration, 401k, and things like that. And very quickly realized that everything that I thought I knew about how we were going to set up this shared service center had to be rewritten. We had to go back to the beginning. The principles were the same of what we wanted to do, and the organization design was pretty similar, but the how was the polar opposite to what I'd come in thinking it would be. And my team back then will tell you that pretty much every sentence I started was, well, in the UK, we do this, and in the UK, we do that. And eventually somebody was like, yes, but you're in the US, and we don't need to do it like the UK, get with the program a little bit. So that was a surprise for me. Looking at the outsourcing landscape and seeing how far along the US were compared to the UK energized me. It gave me a lot of ideas for what we could do in our other locations, which was good. But I think really the North America Shared Service Center was the catalyst for change, because we had a great shared service center in the UK, something to be really proud of. But the North America one looked different, and getting people to say that was okay was a big journey to go on. There was a lot of stakeholder management, because the idea was you're going to take this one hub and replicate it in 5 different locations globally. And actually kind of waving the flag and saying, I get it, but it needs to look different. We have to do it differently over here for it to be successful. That really paved the way for my colleagues that then were going to be setting up Singapore, Norway, and Germany to have the courage to say, and we need to be different again. So yep, got it, got the principles, and here are the fundamental things we do, but we've got to design this for the local market that we're operating in and the local approach. So I think that was a huge learning moment for me, and definitely something that I reflect on often when I'm thinking about things like, okay, just because we've done it like this doesn't necessarily mean that that is going to be right for that part of the business or that function. Take the principles and build on it.
Yeah, and that's great. And some of the things I hear you touching on time and time again are your transition to the U.S. from the UK, some of the different things you've run into. What would you say some of the biggest challenges through your transition from the UK to the U.S., some of the biggest challenges that you ran into? I know we talked about a few earlier, but I'd love to hear a few more. So
from a personal perspective, I know this is probably going to be really hard for you all to believe, but like 10 years ago, we didn't have FaceTime. I'm deadly serious. There was no FaceTime 10 years ago. And Skype was the extent of what you had. But to Skype someone, you couldn't do it on your phone. You had to do it attached to a computer with a video cam. And all of my family and all of my friends were based back in the UK. So juggling this new transition of a 5-hour time zone difference with incredibly expensive phone calls if you wanted to call home, no FaceTime, no Wi-Fi and things like that, and having to be connected to your computer to be able to speak to your family, that was a really hard transition because I came from a very close-knit family, and at the time, one of my sisters had a little girl, and my other sister was expecting. So, and they're in bed. By the time I get home from work at night, it's 10 o'clock in the UK. So getting through that adjustment of not having the access to my family was quite difficult. And I'll tell you that FaceTime and Duo and Google this and all of the good applications that we have really has made a huge difference to being able to work globally. So any kind of conversations, one-to-ones, things like that I have with any of my global colleagues, we'll now do on FaceTime, and just being able to see somebody and have that conversation makes a world of difference. I think professionally, one of the hardest things is recognizing that you are a little bit different. You do have a different accent. You don't necessarily have the affinities to college football teams and that common platform to talk to or whatever it is, although I can go anywhere now and make friends over college football or whatever you want to talk about in that realm. But not having any of those connections and things that people really understood, you know, naturally when you meet somebody, you strike up a conversation and you're looking for something that you've got in common. And when you haven't grown up in the same environments, you don't know the same music, you don't know the city, you don't have any of those affiliations to sports teams and things like that. It can be quite challenging to be the outsider. So taking time to find your place and how you can slot into the team and what you can bring to it was definitely a challenge. And I'm quite an outgoing person. I like to have friends. So finding ways to make friends is different. It's different when you move countries. And just different language. I remember writing down about 12 different words. I had no idea what they meant in the first meeting I was in. I didn't know what a 401k was. Just different world. So that was quite a transition. Not being the person of authority, but not really knowing that much is a strange place to be.
Yeah, and you're talking about it being a different world. And working for Rolls-Royce in their HR department, I'm sure you have a good understanding of maybe the differences, the recruiting teams, and the struggles that they may have across different cultures. What's your experience with that like been?
So I think you see that manifest itself quite well, actually, just looking at the US. So you think about the different geographies you have. You know, the culture on the West Coast is totally different to the culture in the Midwest. It's totally different to the culture on the East Coast. And I think for any organization, the ability to bring all of those different cultures together is really what's going to differentiate you going forward. Technology plays a huge role in everything we do today, so that is going to be part of the future. But the people behind that technology and the innovation and the creativity that cultural differences brought together can enable is really where businesses are going to get the advantage in the future. So we have to work quite hard to make all of our locations quite attractive for different reasons and encourage people to move geographies, to get breadth of experience, and a lot of it is to be able to develop the ability to work with different people. Because if you've got all of this different mindset and diversity of thought, you will get a different product at the end of it.
Yeah, and I kind of liked what you said in the beginning, talking about tech. I'd be really interested to know the influence tech has on you guys integrating Rolls-Royce into different cultures.
Yeah, so if you think about Rolls-Royce, we are surrounded by data all of the time. Our engines run, we get data out of every single engine that's running. At any point in time, we get streams and streams of data from it. And digital capability and how we use that data to help our customers have information, stuff they don't even know that they need, is a huge leverage point for us going forward. How do we take our data and turn it into a product? How do we take our data and inform decisions that our customers need to make about life cycle of engines or whatever it may be? Big data, technology, digital is huge. Then you look at our applications and you say, how have they been influenced by the different technologies that we have? It's incredible, and Rolls-Royce is going through that journey, as most companies are, and where we need to compete in the future for talent will look totally different from where it looks today. You know, we'll be competing with tech companies.
It's really interesting. Kind of going back to something you said earlier, you said you can have the same language but a different culture. Have you found any cultures across the globe that don't necessarily have the same language but have a culture that's similar to ours? Or two cultures that maybe had parallels that you could compare?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to think through. I think the US is quite a unique culture. It's a culture that I enjoy working in, definitely. There is very much a mindset of we come in, we move at pace, we get things done, we go home and we enjoy time with our families. From that regard, I think there are elements of that I see in pockets of Europe where family time is incredibly important. I think the pace is different though. So I always joke that if it's a meeting, it's 30 minutes in the US and we'll be done. And in other countries, it's an hour every time. So I think it's hard to say that there are big similarities because I think every country that I've operated in is very different, and being able to respond to that and work differently is hugely important for anybody in a global company.
That's really interesting. So one of the, towards the end of our questions, one of the questions that we have from President Mearns, who's currently watching this program, he'd like to know, for many years we have seen bumper stickers that say, think globally, act locally. Is that admonition still relevant for students and young adults in the 21st century, or should we be encouraging them to act globally?
So I can probably bring this to life with an example of how it resonates with me. So I think in any organization you have to have some global principles about what's important, values, behaviors, approaches to certain things, and it gives you a common thread throughout your organization. It shows your employees that you're all moving in the same direction, and it's reflective of who your organization is. It's your employer brand. But if I bring that down into a local level, if I take, I don't know, let's take diversity, for example. So at the highest global level, you can have a commitment to creating an environment that's diverse, it's inclusive, it's innovative. Everybody can come to work and feel like they can be at their best, and they can bring their whole self to work. So that could be your global principle, and that, I think, resonates for anybody in any geography that we operate in. How you do that will look totally different because of the local challenges that you have. So if you think about from a US perspective, the local challenges that we have from a diversity perspective look totally different to what the UK may have. And again, even further away from maybe the Middle East or Asia Pac in terms of where they're at. So if you try and act globally on some things, you will never be able to move the needle on the things that are important to your employees because you've got to respond to that local need. And even in the US, how you respond to like the diversity challenge could look very different on the West Coast to the East Coast to the Midwest. So I think there's a lot to be said about having a global mindset and thinking about how things will impact at a global level, but being really true to say, okay, how are we actually going to do something at the local level? Because otherwise you can just end up with very high-level principles and nothing underneath it to support it.
And you were talking about diversity a lot with that. I'd be really interested to know how Rolls-Royce goes about ensuring that they have a diverse group of individuals, because we all know that with diversity you're going to be able to solve more problems. You're going to be able to really, especially in HR, hurdle communication barriers, because you're going to have people around you, like you said, that are really working as your team and assisting you in helping penetrate these different cultures. So how important would you say diversity is within a global company, especially like maybe a sector based out of the US? So
that's a good question for me, because in a former life, the previous role to the one that I had now, I actually led a program of work across the US, specifically looking at culture, diversity, and high performance, and how do we enable that in the organization. And diversity in its most obvious sense, what you see, and how people can kind of see people that look like themselves and they can aspire to be like them. It can be incredibly difficult in the STEM industry. So you look in engineering and you look at the demographic of people that go through engineering classes in school, it is predominantly male, and that's improving. We're getting a lot more females through STEM education, which is a big focus for us as a company. But for me, diversity is more than what you can see. It's how people think, it's their backgrounds, it's their belief systems, and everybody is different. And I really do believe that if as leaders you can understand your team and you can really figure out what makes them tick, how they like to be treated, how they operate, when they can be at their best and they are being creative, and then put teams together that pull out those different things, you can create diversity amongst a group of things that you wouldn't even look to notice about a person. So I think there's a piece about leadership really taking the time to understand their people. The flip side is you have to go out and do it. So you have to build processes that naturally attract you into different diversity populations through your recruitment processes, through your university liaisons, through your development programs. How do you retain people? Because you have to create the environment that people want to stay in as well, otherwise you just have a revolving door. So for me, for Rolls-Royce, actually having a diverse portfolio of people is what's going to make the difference for us over the next 5 to 10 years as we push forward with our engineering solutions. The way in which people think will be what will separate us from our competitors.
So would you say, you're talking about diversity, would you say that diversity really helps increase performance among people that you're working with as a leader?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of studies out there. You can, ask Google and he'll tell you, or she'll tell you, that, having a diverse workforce will impact performance. There's a lot of data to show how it impacts share prices and how an organization will improve as a result of it. But I've seen it firsthand. When I have a team that is very different, with people from lots of different backgrounds, different genders, different races, we work better. We come up with better solutions. I actually have somebody that I work with, and I specifically ask her to kind of challenge my thinking, because I know that she'll think from a totally different perspective, and we're polar opposites. But I'll often say, like, hey Nisha, can you look at this for me? Can you take a look and let me know what you think? And she'll come back with something that's totally different to where my mind was at. But that's when, the diversity of thought is really playing through.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think now we're going to open the floor for about 20 minutes of questions. So if you guys want to come down, state your first and last name. If you're part of an organization, you can list that as well, and then just go ahead and ask your question. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Hey, my name is Daniel Schultz. I'm part of Pi Sigma Epsilon here at Ball State. I just have a quick question. In working with, you said your manager is from Singapore. In working with different people in different cultures, how do you ensure that you are giving and receiving constructive feedback in a manner across language barriers that is helpful to move forward?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Daniel. I appreciate it. So I think it's important that you take the time to invest in the relationship, especially when it's a remote one. So it'd be quite easy for me and my manager to, speak once in a blue moon, which it can sometimes feel like because we are so far apart. But we text daily. We utilize those communication channels. So at the point where you do need to have a difficult conversation or give feedback, one, you've got a relationship there to be able to do it. And two, you know the person, and whilst cultural differences are really important, it's actually about the person's reality and their perception, and you knowing them and knowing how they like to be treated. So I think it is, if you can get those foundations in place and create the right environment, then you're able to effectively have those conversations. Is it easy? No, it's not. It is really challenging, and there will be days where I'll be, sitting at home at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, thinking about going to sleep, and then all of a sudden I'll be like, oh, I have a question that I meant to email her today, but she'll be awake now, so I'll just call her. And my husband will be like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm just calling Daphne, because it's on my mind right now. So I think you just have to invest in that time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question.
Hi, my name is Nathan Marriott. I'm also a member of Pi Sigma Epsilon. My question is, so you've been wildly successful in your career, you've done a lot of great things. What can we as college students do now? What kind of opportunities, organizations, involvement should we be seeking out to set ourselves apart going into the professional world, as well as preparing us for the professional world?
Great question. Thank you, Nathan. I was actually speaking with your assistant dean just before this session and saying, I peeked out to see how many people were out here. I was like, wow, that's a really good crowd. And I hope that amongst this crowd in 15 years, there are people sitting here. And I wouldn't go as far as to say wildly successful, but I do appreciate that accolade. I would say I've done well in my career compared to some people. I've done okay. I think for me, early in your career, don't pigeonhole yourself. Don't be so specific that you kind of only focus in on one thing. I know that where I started from to where I am now and the journey that I've been on, I could never have mapped that out. I actually don't think half of the roles that I've done even existed when I started my career. And that's what's going to happen to all of you. So what you're looking at today is not going to look the same in 10, 15 years' time. In fact, they said something like 50% of the jobs that will exist 15 years from now do not exist today. So when you think about that for a second and you think about your career, focus on the skills that you want to develop, focus on the types of behaviors that you think you need to improve, and if you can demonstrate those things, that then leads you to the next opportunity. Because people aren't always going to say, well, they've never been a project manager, so you can never be a project manager. They're going to look at it and say, when have they demonstrated the skills that would lead them to be a project manager? I think get your internships, take the opportunities over the summer to work in different organizations. While you're studying, if you have the opportunity and there are organizations around you that you can work with, get that. The more exposure you can get into different environments, the more you'll start learning about yourself and what's important to you and what you look for in a company. And I've worked for companies that I've not enjoyed working for, and then I've worked at Rolls-Royce. And when you find the culture that's right for you, and not every culture will be right for everybody, and I think recognizing what you like and what you don't like is really important. So take the time early in your career to figure that out. You've got plenty of time to be successful later in your career, but early on, take the time to figure out like what you enjoy, what makes you tick, and build those blocks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dimple Day. I'm not with any specific organization, but I did have a question for you. Oftentimes there is a lack of diversity and representation in the corporate world, whether it be in racial minorities or women groups. So I just wanted to know what advice you had for people who are trying to work against those barriers and not only overcome them, but also tear them down as well.
Absolutely, great question. I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, so I think...
Temple Day.
Thank you. I think the microphone cut out a little bit there. I think that one of the hardest things in society right now is pushing through those barriers and breaking them down. So people recognizing that we have challenges, and we're not perfect, and we need to do something about it, for me, is step one. Many organizations now are helping with that drive and pushing the boundaries. So if I think about Rolls-Royce, we have employee resource groups specifically set up for different minority groups to come together and help advise the company on what should we be doing differently, where are we seeing issues, that reverse mentoring that kind of holds that mirror up to say, when you did this, this is how it really feels for some people, is important, because I think in a lot of cases people don't even realize that they're doing something that can be construed as negative. So I think speak up and be part of the positive change. And I say that in a way of, where we've seen the most success in Rolls-Royce is where people have come and presented really good solutions and said, I think I see this issue, if I can do X, Y, and Z, I think that helps move the needle. And we've seen the best results where those employee resource groups have worked together, because you wouldn't, for argument's sake, LGBT, a veteran might not necessarily walk into an LGBT meeting or a Black Employee Network meeting, or name any of our ERGs as an example, because they'd say, well, I don't identify, I'm a veteran, maybe I'm a white male, this is my ERG. But actually, if those two ERGs do a joint event together, that person will come and that person will come, and then you've created a common ground for them to learn something new. And if everybody walks out of that door learning something new, you're taking a step forward. So we've had some great success there in terms of getting that cross-collaboration, kind of pushing it together. But I would definitely say find solutions, get those solutions into the right hands in a company and elevate them. Because we definitely get our best success when it's employee-driven.
Thank you.
My name is Jalen, and I was wondering, how do you guys make a difference between you and your other competitors?
Sorry, say that last part.
What's the difference between you and your competitors?
Oh, well, we're Rolls-Royce, so that answers that. It's just the name. It is our people. It absolutely is our people. And I think, you know, all of our competitors are incredible. Think about what we do, right? Have you ever sat on an aircraft and thought, how is this staying in the sky? I do it all the time, and I know how it stays in the sky. So anybody that works in our industry, phenomenal companies. We absolutely are at the leading edge of technology and really pushing the barriers on science all of the time. So what's different is the people and the culture. So I think Rolls-Royce is an organization that's steeped in history. We're very proud of that history. It comes through in our culture, in everything that we do. And the people that are in the organization are what differentiate us. It's a great big family.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. I feel like I need a chant for that, like we are Rolls-Royce or something along those lines, but I'll leave that for the sports team.
All right, if we don't have any other questions, we're going to wrap up. We appreciate you guys coming out, and thank you for your time.